At exactly 4:00 a.m., the city of Seattle was cloaked in damp silence, its streets glistening under amber streetlights with only the occasional delivery truck breaking the stillness. A rented, nondescript gray sedan pulled up 2 blocks away from a bakery tucked between towering glass buildings. The man behind the wheel adjusted his cap, checked the mirror once, and sighed. The reflection staring back at him was almost unrecognizable. Beard peppered with gray sweatshirt, rumpled eyes weary but sharp. Jackson Reeves, CEO of Golden Harvest, had spent the past 2 weeks transforming himself into someone forgettable. He whispered to his reflection one last time, "So Evan, ready to clock in?" This wasn't just a marketing stunt or a PR experiment. Something at his flagship bakery, the highest-rated Golden Harvest store, was deeply off. Consultants had failed. Analysts had shrugged. Despite glowing reviews, long morning lines, and 5-star posts on Yelp, profit margins were inexplicably shrinking. Staff turnover was rising. Jackson knew better than to trust reports that smelled too clean, so he'd done what his father always told him when things went stale in the kitchen. Get your hands in the flour. Golden Harvest was his brainchild. He built the first store from the ground up, mortgaging everything he had, scrubbing ovens, sleeping on flour sacks. Now with 37 locations and a feature on Forbes Leaders to Watch, he couldn't walk into one without people straightening up and managers snapping to attention. But Evan, the quiet corporate trainee, he'd be invisible, and that's what he needed. As he approached the bakery, the scent of butter and brown sugar reached him before he saw the light. It was 4:45 a.m. The bakery wasn't just open, it was alive. Through the wide glass window, Jackson paused. Inside, a lone woman worked. Auburn hair tied in a tight bun, sleeves rolled, movements precise, practiced. She wasn't just prepping ingredients, she was shaping morning buns with a grace that made flour and sugar look like poetry. No hesitation, no wasted motion. It was mesmerizing. She never looked up. At exactly 5:00 a.m., the front door buzzed open. A tall man in his early 30s greeted Jackson with a weary but polite smile. "You must be Evan, new guy from corporate." Jackson straightened into the practiced slouch of a lower-rung staffer. "Yeah, thanks for taking me in last minute." "No problem," the man replied, extending a hand. His name tag read Logan Pierce. "They've been sending folks like you to align local processes. Corporate jargon, whatever." Jackson smirked inwardly. That initiative had been his idea. The bakery was warm, filled with the scent of toasted sugar and cinnamon. The floors gleamed. Display cases stood empty, waiting. As Logan led him toward the back, they passed the woman at the workstation. "She's been here since before me," Logan whispered. "That's Lena. Handles all the artisan prep. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't like interruptions." Jackson didn't reply. He was already watching her hands again, how they folded dough, how each roll was nearly identical in shape and size, how she moved like the recipe had become a part of her. This wasn't just talent. It was obsession. They said bakers live by rhythm. Lena was the metronome. Jackson asked, "She always come in that early?" "Always by 4:30, sometimes earlier. Official prep starts at 5, but she just shows up." They moved through the day, equipment walkthroughs, introductions. Jackson asked dumb questions, fumbled with trays, pretended to be new. Logan was patient, and the rest of the team worked like gears in a machine. But one thing was clear. Lena was the engine. Every tray she put out sold instantly. Her morning buns caramelized and golden coils of cinnamon glistening were the bakery's crown jewel. Customers began lining up before 7:00 a.m., asking for her pastries by name. By 9:00, they were sold out. And Lena, she never looked up. Never spoke unless necessary. She moved like someone used to working alone, and liked it that way. But Jackson saw more. When a young part-time employee accidentally knocked over an entire tray of raw dough near her station, Lena didn't scold. She knelt beside him and murmured, "First rule of baking: accidents happen." Then she salvaged what she could, quick and efficient. Jackson stepped in to help, but Lena raised a flour-covered hand without glancing his way. "I've got this. You're new. Go learn the counter." There was no pride in her voice, just a quiet, unshakable boundary. He'd seen people like her before, those who weren't just working a job. They were surviving something. By the time lunch passed, Jackson had confirmed it. Lena's pastry station ran the entire store. Every customer who walked in hungry and curious left talking about her morning buns. She was the reason they returned. She was the reason Golden Harvest Seattle hadn't collapsed under its own inefficiencies. So why did no one know her name? Later that day, during a surprise bulk order for 72 almond morning buns, Lena finally spoke to him. Fold like this, she said, sliding dough to his station. Not too tight, not too loose. He mimicked her technique clumsily on purpose. But her hands, steady worn scarred from years of work, reached over his and guided the motion. Feel the tension, she said softly. The dough will tell you what it needs. It wasn't just bread she was molding, it was survival. Jackson noticed a small flame tattoo just above her wrist. Simple, black, meaningful. You've done this before, she suddenly said, narrowing her eyes. It wasn't a question. Jackson blinked. Just good with my hands, I guess. She watched him a moment longer, then nodded. You're not terrible. That's better than most trainees they send us. The shift ended, but Lena didn't. While others clocked out or chatted over drinks, she scrubbed the floor on her knees, refilled sugar, dragged a 50-pound flour sack across the prep area without help. Said nothing. At 8:30 p.m., she slipped out the back, clipped a worn backpack to a rusted bicycle, and pedaled alone into the dark. No car, no Uber, no small luxury of ease. Just quiet grit. Jackson followed at a distance. Not as a boss, but as a man who had once carried dough on his back, who knew the difference between hunger and hunger. That night back at the motel, he opened her employee file. Lena Hart, age 34, artisan pastry prep. Hired 8 years ago. Performance reviews outstanding. Promotions offered, all declined. Raises above base declined. Debt recurring deductions labeled Hamilton Financial. Jackson's jaw tightened. 8 years, no recognition, no break, no promotions. And now Hamilton Financial. He whispered to himself, what are you really working for, Lena Hart? And somewhere deep down he knew, this story wasn't just about stale profits. It was about something that had gone sour at the core. By the time the third morning rolled around, Jackson Reeves no longer needed to pretend. His body ached in ways he hadn't felt in years, his back sore from lifting trays feet raw, from standing on tile for 12-hour shifts, fingers tender from washing endless piles of pans. But what really haunted him was her. Lena Hart. She was always there first. He'd started coming in earlier each day hoping to catch her arrival, but it was like trying to beat the sunrise. Every morning the lights in the kitchen were already glowing before his key turned in the front door. The scent of cinnamon and butter clung to the walls like memory. And there she was, hair tied tight, face unreadable, hands already in motion, rolling and folding morning buns with the same rhythm as the day before. Jackson had built Golden Harvest on systems, processes, recipes, logistics. But Lena wasn't a system. She was something rarer, something that couldn't be bought, trained, or replicated. And that terrified him. He'd seen the bakery's reports. Her station was responsible for over 30% of all revenue. She was the magnet, the quiet storm that kept customers coming back, even as everything else faltered. But if she left tomorrow, the whole flagship store would collapse within weeks. Yet, she wasn't asking for raises. She wasn't seeking attention. She didn't even want her name on the pastry board. She just worked. And the way she worked, it wasn't for ambition, it was for survival. During their breaks, Jackson started listening to the team. Not questioning, just watching how they spoke about her. The reverence was always there, but so was the mystery. Lena's been here forever, said Zach, the college kid working part-time. She's like part of the building. Customers come in just to ask if she made the buns that day. Some leave if she didn't. She never talks about herself, added Kayla, the register girl. Last Christmas, a customer left a $500 tip just for her. You know what she did? Split it equally between all of us. Said she didn't want special treatment. Jackson had to clench his jaw to hide the wave of emotion that statement brought. This woman was holding up his entire operation, and she was still giving away her piece of the pie. Why? He dug deeper. Back at the motel that night, he accessed the internal HR portal under his CEO credentials. Her file was clean. Too clean. No write-ups. No complaints. No sick days. 8 years. Not a single disciplinary mark. Only one recurring anomaly. Third-party deduction, Hamilton Financial Services. Every paycheck, every month, for 7 years. He stared at the screen, the name hammering in his chest. Hamilton. He knew them. A vulture firm. Predatory loans. Interest rates so high, they turned dreams into shackles. They were the last resort for people who had no other options, desperate entrepreneurs, bankrupt shopkeepers. People who had no choice but to say yes when the bank said no. And Lena had been paying them since the very year she was hired. He leaned back slowly, piecing it together like a puzzle, missing too many corners. She worked double shifts. She refused promotions, declined raises, took no vacations. She was funneling every extra cent somewhere. But to what? The next day at the bakery, Jackson paid closer attention. Her shoulders sagged slightly more. The circles under her eyes had darkened. But she never slowed. She never faltered. Not once. At one point, when Raphael, the head baker, offered her a break after 3 solid hours on her feet, she simply shook her head. "I'm good," she murmured and kept folding. She wasn't fine. She was fighting something. And that fight, whatever it was personal. By late afternoon, a shipment of specialty flour arrived late. A 2-hour job minimum. Everyone groaned. "I'll stay," Lena said instantly before anyone else could speak. Raphael looked up. "You already opened today. That's a 14-hour shift." "I don't mind." Jackson watched the exchange from the prep counter, pretending to wipe down a surface. No one even questioned it. This was normal. She'd volunteered before, and she'd do it again. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. Miguel turned to Jackson. "You good staying too? We can tag team it." "Yeah," Jackson replied. "No problem." Inside, his heart pounded. He needed answers. And the only way to get them was to be right next to her. For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side in the back storage room. The air was thick with flour dust and exhaustion. Lena moved with the same intensity as always, but now up close, he saw the tremors in her hands, the tiny involuntary shakes, the slight hitch in her breath. She was running on fumes. At 9:30 p.m., with the last bag stored, Jackson noticed her linger outside the manager's office. She hesitated, then knocked gently. Monica, the store's general manager, looked up from her laptop. "Sorry to bother you," Lena said, voice quiet. "I was wondering if I could pick up some extra shifts next week. Maybe cover Madison's mornings if she's still out." Monica frowned. "Lena, you're already clocking overtime. I can't authorize more hours without corporate approval." Lena nodded quickly. "What if I clock out at 8 and just stay to help off the books?" "Lena," Monica said gently, "you know I can't let you do that." There was a pause. "It's just that I really need the—" She stopped herself. Her voice cracked. "Never mind, sorry I asked." She turned and left. Jackson saw it. Not frustration, desperation. He couldn't sleep that night. Her face so composed in front of Monica had betrayed her for just a second. That second had revealed everything, the weight she carried, the quiet panic behind her stoicism. He opened his laptop, logged into the corporate system again, pulled every transaction tied to Hamilton Financial, and what he found made his blood go cold. The deduction wasn't for a loan she had taken. It wasn't even in her name. It was labeled Dummors, Iferdesironernishern Kunter. Creditor payment, Jason Hart. Jackson froze. Jason Hart, same last name. He ran a quick search. Deceased. Died 7 years ago. Cause of death, car accident on Interstate 5. Date of incident 1 month after a bakery fire. He slammed the lid shut. It couldn't be a coincidence. Lena was paying a debt that wasn't even hers. Not really. A ghost debt, a legacy of loss. And suddenly it all made sense. The flame tattoo, the silence, the rejection of attention, the unwillingness to move up, the obsession with perfection. She wasn't just baking to survive. She was honoring someone who died believing their dream had failed. And she was willing to sacrifice everything to keep that dream breathing. Jackson Reeves leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring into the darkness of the cheap motel room. This wasn't just about stolen profits anymore. It was about a stolen life. And he had a sinking feeling. Golden Harvest might have been the one who took it. The early morning air in Seattle tasted like rain and electricity's sharp damp alert. At 4:15 a.m., Jackson Reeves stood outside the flagship Golden Harvest Bakery the same way he had for the past 4 days. Except today, he wasn't trying to play the role of a curious trainee. Today his mind was burning. Inside, the lights were already on. Of course they were. She was already there. Lena Hart. He stepped through the back door quietly. She was at her station folding dough, like the rhythm of it kept her upright. But Jackson noticed what others didn't: the darker circles under her eyes, the slight slump in her spine, the twitch in her fingers as she pinched cinnamon sugar edges into perfection. "Rough night?" he asked, tying his apron beside her. She didn't even look up. Just the usual. But it wasn't the usual. Not anymore. That night in the motel, Jackson had followed a trail he never expected to find, a paper trail soaked in grief, sacrifice, and betrayal. The recurring deduction from Lena's paychecks wasn't for her. It was tied to someone else. Jason Hart, her brother. dead 7 years ago. And the records were clear the payment had started shortly after his death. The recipient, Hamilton Financial Services, a company infamous for trapping desperate entrepreneurs with rescue loans at interest rates so brutal they buried businesses instead of saving them. But here was the worst part: after 7 years, the principal balance had barely moved. She was paying into a pit dug by someone else, someone who no longer had breath or a voice. And yet Lena, tireless, silent, covered in flour, was still trying to shovel her way out. Jackson couldn't look at her the same way anymore. He didn't just see a baker. He saw a sister carrying a dead man's cross uphill. And something told him that even she didn't know how much deeper this really went. During lunch, while Monica was busy juggling supplier calls, Jackson slipped into the manager's office. Her terminal was still logged in a stroke of luck or a sign. Either way, he didn't hesitate. He pulled Lena's employee file again. Only one emergency contact: Jason Hart. Still listed even in death. Jackson cross-referenced it with public records, business filings, and archived company documents. He had a hunch. And if he was right, this went beyond personal tragedy. It was about something stolen, something Golden Harvest had built an empire on. He needed more. That afternoon, he volunteered to run a supply errand across town at a sister store run by Caroline Madison, a longtime regional manager. Jackson had known her for years back when she ran the original San Jose location. If anyone remembered Lena's beginnings, it was her. When he arrived, she was reviewing invoices behind the front counter. "I'm looking into employee retention patterns," he said casually. "Just curious about long-timers. You remember when Lena Hart was hired?" Caroline's eyes softened. "Lena," she said. "Of course, that poor girl." Jackson leaned in. "She doesn't talk much. Hard to get a read. She came to us right after everything," Caroline said. "Her brother had just died. They used to run a little bakery together. North end of the city, Heart and Hearth. Just the two of them. Parents had passed away. Jason handled the books, Lena did the baking. Their morning buns were already famous even back then." Jackson's breath caught. "What happened?" Caroline exhaled. "The recession hit hard. Jason took out a loan to expand, renovate, upgrade equipment. Got pre-approval from a bank, but it collapsed before funding cleared. So he turned to a private lender." Jackson didn't have to ask who. He already knew Hamilton Financial. "Then came the fire," Caroline continued. "Faulty wiring in the new ovens. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Permits weren't finalized. They lost everything." Jackson stared, lips pressed tight. A month later, Caroline added, voice quiet. Now Jason drove off the highway. "It was awful." She looked down at her clipboard. "Lena walked into our store with flour still on her sleeves. Said she needed a job. Any job. She wasn't the same after that. Hollow, but steady." Jackson thanked her and left. His hands were shaking. This wasn't just about a loan. It was about a man with a dream. A man who died believing his dream was a failure. A man whose sister had been carrying his burden like penance for 7 years. Back at the flagship store, Jackson opened Golden Harvest product development archives. He searched for Jason Hart. Nothing under acquisitions, nothing under vendor relations. But under unsolicited submissions in a folder nearly forgotten, he found it. Submission proposal, Jason Hart subject. Signature, sourdough formula date. 8 years ago, status rejected. Not aligned with brand direction? Attached was a PDF. Ingredient ratios. Fermentation schedules. Projected margins. And something else, the exact fermentation blend and timing now used in Golden Harvest's best-selling product line, the Heritage Sourdough. Jackson's hands curled into fists. He pulled up the current company formula. It matched, almost identically. Then he dug deeper into the executive-only internal communications from that same time. He found them. Emails, internal, confidential. From Connor Vance to executive product team. Subject: innovative sourdough formula proposal for rollout. Connor Vance, the former VP of product development, the same man who left the company 5 years ago under vague allegations of misconduct. The same man who had received a 6-figure bonus for creating and launching the Heritage Sourdough line. But he hadn't created anything. He had stolen it. The recipe that built Golden Harvest's second most profitable product line had come from Jason Hart. The same Jason Hart who died thinking his idea was worthless. The same Jason Hart whose sister had been making that bread by hand every morning for years without ever knowing it had once belonged to her family. Jackson leaned back in his chair. The rejection letter had been a lie. The bonus was blood money, the formula was stolen. He rubbed his eyes, heart pounding. What kind of company had he built? One that rewarded thieves. One that buried creators. He looked at Lena across the kitchen, wiping down the counter. Still working, still silent, still unaware of the truth. She wasn't just the best artisan baker in his company. She was the guardian of a stolen legacy. And no one, not even she, knew it. That night, Jackson didn't sleep. He printed out the original recipe submission, Jason's notes, his margins, his projections. He spread them on the motel bed like sacred pages. Then he whispered aloud to the empty room, "This doesn't belong to us. It never did." The kitchen was still when Jackson entered the next morning. Not quiet still like the moment right before a storm breaks. The stainless steel counters gleamed under the flickering fluorescent lights. The ovens hadn't even started humming yet. But Lena, she was already there. She always was. She didn't turn around when he walked in, didn't look up as she measured ingredients with her usual machine-like precision. The same tight bun, the same soft gray shirt sleeves, rolled apron, already streaked with flour. Her hands moved but slower now. Not from laziness, from exhaustion. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, in the almost imperceptible tremble of her fingers as she pinched cinnamon sugar coils into perfect spirals. "You're early," she said flatly. "Couldn't sleep," Jackson replied, and it was the truth. She said nothing more, and for a long moment neither did he. But today Jackson hadn't come to learn how to proof dough. He hadn't come to pretend. Today the mask was coming off. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. She didn't stop, but her hands slowed just slightly. "Depends on the question." "That flame tattoo on your wrist," Jackson said gently. "What does it mean?" "That did it." Her rhythm faltered. Just a flicker, but enough. She stared down at the flour-dusted table. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it. "It's to remember something I lost." Jackson's voice softened. "Something that can't be rebuilt." She froze again, then turned, her eyes narrowed. "How do you—" "Heart and Hearth," he said softly. "Your brother Jason's bakery." The rolling pin slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. She took a step back. Her face had gone pale, her body stiff. "Who are you?" Jackson took a breath, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it gently on the counter between them. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to him. "My name is Jackson Reeves," he said quietly. "I'm the CEO of Golden Harvest." Silence in the kitchen was deafening. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum quieter. Lena stared at him, frozen. "You're what?" "I've been undercover," Jackson continued, "trying to figure out why our Seattle flagship store, the highest rated in the company, is barely breaking even." He tapped the paper in front of her. "But what I found was bigger than supply chain delays or turnover reports." Lena's eyes fell to the document. Her breath caught. She reached out with trembling hands, lifted the page, and scanned it. It was a scan of her brother's original recipe submission. Jason Hart, signature sourdough formula. Ingredient ratios, temperature guidelines, fermentation times. The same formula now used in Golden Harvest's Heritage sourdough line. Recognition spread across her face like a slow-breaking wave. "How did you get this?" she whispered. "Because this," Jackson said, "is what built our second most profitable product. And your brother never saw a dime." Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto a stool. Jackson sat beside her. "Jason was told the formula was rejected," she said numbly. "He was devastated. Thought it meant he'd failed. Thought the bakery was a lost cause." She stared at the paper in front of her, eyes wide with disbelief. "He took out that loan with Hamilton Financial because he still believed the recipe had value. He thought, maybe if we had one more shot." Jackson nodded, pain twisting in his chest. He was right. The formula did have value. Connor Vance, our former VP of Product Development, lifted Jason's submission, presented it to the board as his own, and launched the Heritage line. He pointed to the formula. "This made us millions." Lena's voice cracked. "And all this time, I've been working to pay off a loan from a dream that someone else cashed in." A slow tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why tell me this? Why now? You could have just fired me, ignored this, swept it under the rug." Jackson shook his head. "Because this company owes you, not the other way around." He reached into his backpack again, pulled out a tablet, and placed it in front of her. On the screen was a financial summary. "Since launch, the Heritage line has generated over $12 million. And you have never taken a promotion, refused every raise, and continued paying off debt that should have never been yours." Lena stared at the numbers in disbelief. That's enough to pay off the loan 3 times over." He nodded. "I also reviewed the original submission clause," he added. "Any accepted idea must be compensated even if altered." Vance bypassed that. She was shaking now, not from fear, from rage, from grief. Jason believed he died of failure, she whispered. He thought none of it had been worth it. Jackson looked her in the eye. It was. He was. And I swear to you, we are going to fix this. Just then the back door creaked open. Logan stepped in, pausing mid-step, when he saw the two of them, papers scattered across the table. Evan, he asked, confused. Everything okay? Jackson stood, straightened his back, and turned to face him fully. I need you to call Monica, he said, and tell her to come in right away. Then call regional management. We're holding a 9 a.m. emergency meeting. Logan blinked. I don't think... Tell them, Jackson said calmly, that Jackson Reeves is calling the meeting. Logan's mouth fell open. You're... Jackson nodded. Yes, I am. Then he turned back to Lena. We have calculations to finish. Western the Sickener Maschinen. The next few hours moved in a blur. Staff filed in early, confused. Word spread like wildfire. The CEO was here, in person, not in a suit, not in a boardroom, in the kitchen. By 9 a.m., the conference room in the back of the store was full. 6 regional executives, Monica and Lena, sat in silence as Jackson took the floor. Behind him on the screen, a title slide glowed. Intellectual Property Breach Heritage Sourdough Line. No fanfare, no preamble. Jackson clicked. 8 years ago, he began this company's second most profitable product line, was built on a formula submitted by Jason Hart, a local baker, who died believing his work had no value. He clicked again. The screen split in two. On the left, Jason's original recipe submission. On the right, the internal formula Golden Harvest had used for 8 years. They matched. This isn't coincidence, Jackson said, his voice low but sharp. This is theft. Around the table, expressions shifted: shock, shame, disbelief. Jackson continued. The man who took this formula, Connor Vance, was awarded over $250,000 in bonuses. Jason Hart received nothing, not even credit. Meanwhile, his sister Lena has spent the last 8 years baking in silence, working to repay the loan that his stolen formula was supposed to cover. A voice cut in Evelyn Granger, board chair, patched in via Zoom. This is highly irregular, she said. Going undercover without board approval, digging up 8-year-old files, accusing former executives. What's irregular, Jackson interrupted, is that the woman whose family built our product line has been working herself to the bone while we profited from their recipe. He clicked to a live revenue screen. Heritage Sourdough, $12.4 million in sales. And yet Lena Hart has refused every raise, declined every promotion, and asked to split her paycheck between herself and a third-party creditor. He paused. Why? Because she believed the debt was hers? Because no one told her the truth. Another voice, older, quieter, Franklin Doyle, senior board member. What exactly are you proposing? Jackson stood straighter. 3 things, he said. 1, immediate debt relief. Golden Harvest will pay Lena Hart's outstanding balance with Hamilton Financial in full. 2, retroactive compensation for the use of Jason Hart's intellectual property based on industry averages that amounts to $3.2 million. He waited for gas to settle. 3, we create a new role. Head of Artisan Product Development. Lena Hart will lead the handcrafted pastry division with full creative control and executive-level compensation. Evelyn's voice was cold. This has not been reviewed by the board. Then review it, Jackson replied. Or I release the full story emails, documents, and an internal timeline to Food and Culture Weekly. They're already interested in profiling our heritage line. I doubt they'd mind printing the truth. Silence, heavy and sharp. Then, I'd like to say something, Lena said. Every head turned. Even on the screen, the board froze. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. For 8 years, Lena said, I came in before sunrise. I stayed after close. I worked through holidays, birthdays, death anniversaries. She glanced at the flowers still on her hands. Not because I love Golden Harvest, but because I owed a debt, and because I wanted my brother's name to mean something. She looked straight at the screen. I don't want millions. I want his name on his creation. I want to finish paying the debt that buried him, and I want this company to stop pretending ideas don't matter if they come from the wrong people. Silence. Then Evelyn spoke again, this time gentler. Miss Hart, would you give us 30 minutes to deliberate? Lena nodded. Jackson looked at her. Are you okay? Her exhale shook. I don't know. The air in the small conference room at Golden Harvest flagship store had turned heavy, too heavy, for a space that usually echoed with the scent of cinnamon coffee and early morning chatter. Now the only aroma in the room was tension. Jackson Reeves sat beside Lena Hart, elbows on the table, palms pressed together like he was holding something fragile, perhaps his company's soul. She sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, streaks of flour still lingering on her apron, like scars from a battle she never volunteered to fight. Across from them, a wall-mounted screen displayed 6 board members connected via live feed. None of them spoke. Behind the muted stillness, you could sense the weight of Lena's words lingering in the air like smoke that refused to clear. I don't want your millions. I want my brother's name on his creation. Those words had carved silence into stone. Now they waited. Jackson had watched Lena for a dozen mornings, but never like this. She didn't fidget. She didn't blink. Her jaw was set, her spine straight. Her grief coiled tightly inside her. Not burning, not boiling. Focused. He didn't know what answer the board would come back with. What he did know was this: if they denied her, if they chose numbers over names again, he was ready to burn the whole company to the ground. After 35 excruciating minutes, the screen flickered. The board had returned. At the center, Evelyn Granger's face reappeared, stoic, unreadable. But when she began to speak, there was a softness to her tone that hadn't been there before. After review and discussion with both the board and legal counsel, she began, "We are prepared to issue a formal response." The room tensed. Jackson didn't move. Lena didn't breathe. "We acknowledge," Evelyn continued, "that Golden Harvest failed to properly investigate the origin of the formula used in the Heritage sourdough product line. Based on documentation submitted by Mr. Reeves and our own internal records, it is clear that Jason Hart's original submission was utilized without consent, credit, or compensation." She paused. Small words. A massive step. This, Evelyn said, her voice steadying, represents a breach of our own intellectual property ethics and corporate values. She looked directly at Lena through the screen. "Therefore, the board has unanimously voted to accept the CEO's proposal in full." Jackson let out a slow breath. Lena didn't move. Effective immediately, Evelyn continued, "Golden Harvest will assume and settle the outstanding debt Lena Hart has been paying to Hamilton Financial Services." A murmur rose from the other side of the screen. 1 or 2 board members blinked. Monica, standing at the back of the room, pressed a hand to her chest. In addition, Evelyn said, "We will issue a formal acknowledgement of Jason Hart as the originator of the Heritage sourdough formula. This acknowledgement will appear on all related internal and external materials, including packaging, marketing, and store signage." Lena's throat bobbed. Jackson watched as her eyes flickered, not with tears, but something even deeper. Validation. Finally. Evelyn wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Lena Hart will be offered the newly created position of Head of Artisan Product Development. This offer includes executive-level compensation, full creative control, and an annual profit-sharing agreement retroactive to the date the product line was launched." Jackson turned toward Lena, but she still hadn't moved. She blinked once. Then again. "You're serious," she whispered. Evelyn nodded. "We are, and we apologize for everything." The call ended. Silence dropped like a curtain. It was Logan, standing quietly in the corner, who finally broke it. "Holy hell!" The room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath since sunrise. Jackson rose slowly and turned to Lena, who still hadn't moved. "You okay?" he asked again. This time she nodded. "Barely." He reached into his bag and handed her a folder. "Draft offer letter. No pressure. Take your time. Review it. Bring a lawyer. Do whatever you need." She held it like it weighed 50 pounds. "Why did you do this?" she asked, eyes finally meeting his. Jackson didn't hesitate. "Because I remember what it's like to owe more than you make in a year," he said. "I remember sitting across from a banker who offered me a loan with a 24% interest rate and a fake smile. I remember losing someone I loved and thinking I had failed them because I didn't fight harder." He looked at her not just with empathy, but something else. "Responsibility. But mostly," he added, "because if we're running a company where theft is rewarded over talent, where silence is prized more than courage, then I don't want my name on it." That was the moment Lena's eyes finally glistened. But she didn't cry. Instead, she said, "Can I show you something?" Jackson followed her back into the kitchen. The ovens had cooled. The scent of sugar and cinnamon had faded into the walls. In the far corner, on a metal prep table, sat a notebook, battered, frayed, flour-stained. She opened it slowly. Inside were page after page of handwritten notes. "Jason wrote everything down," she whispered. "Every test, every failure, every idea." Jackson leaned in. There it was, dozens of versions. Notes in the margins, adjustments to rise times, scratch-outs and corrections. Passion made visible. She turned to one labeled version 4.3 final. "This is the one you sell now," she said. "Every morning." Jackson scanned the ingredients, the measurements, the exact blend he had memorized from the corporate database. "Your brother didn't just write a recipe," he whispered. He designed a legacy. She turned the page one last time. At the bottom, written in bold, underlined twice, were 5 words. Give credit always, even if no one's watching. Lena closed the book. I think he would have liked you, she said quietly. Jackson's voice broke when he answered. I wish I'd met him, he said. But maybe, in a way, I just did. Why can't I name? Turn. 3 weeks later, the Golden Harvest flagship store still looked the same. Same display cases, same rustic charm, same early morning scent of baking sugar and bread. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. Near the front counter, a new bronze plaque had been installed, in honor of Jason Hart, whose recipe and resilience helped build this foundation. A true artisan, never forgotten. Lena passed it every morning without pausing, but Jackson noticed something about the way she walked. Now her spine was straighter, her chin higher. She wore a new apron. Her name was stitched into it. Beneath that is Seginum, head of artisan product development. She still showed up at 5:00 a.m., still shaped dough with her own hands. But now she also mentored new bakers, listened to pitches, reviewed product submissions alongside legal. She wasn't just building pastries anymore. She was building protection for the next Jason. Upstairs, Jackson stood behind the conference room glass, sipping a black coffee as he watched her work. Monica walked in behind him, setting a folder on the table. We've been getting flooded, she said. Submissions from small-town bakers, retired teachers, hobbyists. She hesitated. You didn't just do this for her, did you? Jackson smiled faintly. No, he said, I did it for us. He turned to her, his face unreadable. I built Golden Harvest on one principle, that value comes from the people who create it. But when I dug into those archives, when I saw what we'd overlooked, what we stole, I realized. He set the cup down untouched. If a company becomes big enough to steal and get away with it, it's also big enough to collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. He looked out the window again. This wasn't just an internal correction. It was a wake-up call. Monica watched him carefully because the moment we stop protecting the people who build what we sell, he said, we stop having any right to exist. Downstairs, Lena was showing 2 junior bakers how to fold dough into a new seasonal variation of the morning bun. One of them, a girl no older than 19, asked nervously, what if someone steals this recipe too? Lena paused, glanced toward the plaque, then up at the glass where she knew Jackson usually stood. They won't, she said. But how do you know, the girl asked. Lena smiled just slightly. Because now, she said, someone's watching, and someone finally cares who gets credit. That night, Jackson returned to his office. On his desk sat a letter, no return address. He opened it. Inside was the original sourdough formula. Jason's handwriting, annotated, signed. A note was tucked in the envelope. 5 words. Don't forget why this matters. For the next Jason, LH. Jackson read it once, then again. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt responsible. Because this was never just about a stolen recipe. It was about a system that taught creators to stay silent and executives to assume credit. Golden Harvest didn't just owe Lena a paycheck. It owed Jason his name. And it owed every future dreamer something else. A promise not of profit, but of fairness, of acknowledgement, of dignity. Because if ideas are no longer protected, what value does effort hold? And if credit always follows power, not truth, then what kind of justice are we really building? The morning light bathed the glass facade of Golden Harvest's headquarters in gold, an almost poetic reflection of the name etched on its entrance. Inside, however, something more profound than sunlight was changing the company. The air was different now, sharper, cleaner. It wasn't about the smell of bread anymore. It was something else, integrity finally unmistakably baking into the very structure of the organization. 2 months had passed since Lena Hart's name appeared in national headlines, bakery giant credits, local woman's late brother for iconic recipe. The story sparked fire across the business world. And yet what began as a personal act of justice had triggered something much larger, a cultural shift, not just within Golden Harvest, but in the way businesses around the country were reevaluating how credit, creativity, and contribution were defined. Jackson Reeves stood in his office looking over a set of documents spread across his desk. Acquisition proposal strategy, memos, upcoming product ideas. But his attention was locked on one binder in particular, the equity manifesto. Lena had written it. He hadn't asked her to. She just showed up one morning an hour before sunrise as usual and handed him a thick file with flour on the corners and a hand-drawn cover that read, "For the next dreamer." Inside were 47 pages of policies. Some were simple, some radical, but all of them aimed at one thing: protecting the creators. She proposed three major reforms: idea origin tracking, an internal system that tracked product submissions from origin to execution, documenting every contribution, no matter how small; ethics and attribution committee, an independent panel made up of employees from across departments to evaluate claims of intellectual contribution and ensure every recipe, campaign, or innovation was properly credited; profit-sharing mandates, a company-wide rule that any product generating over $1 million in revenue must include a profit-sharing plan for the original contributors. Jackson flipped through the pages slowly. Most CEOs would balk, but not him. Not anymore. That's what Jason Hart had done from the grave. He'd forced a billion-dollar brand to look inward, to admit failure, and to rebuild from the flour-dusted ground up. Downstairs, the Bake Lab. The pilot program was underway. Lena had transformed a corner of the flagship location into something she called the Bake Lab, an open creative space where team members, local bakers, and even culinary students could experiment. There were no clocks in the room, no quotas, no supervisors hovering, just ingredients, open tables, and one rule posted on the wall in Lena's handwriting: if you make something worth remembering, make sure the person who inspired it gets remembered too. On this particular morning, Lena stood beside a nervous 17-year-old named Myra. The teen was from the East Side Culinary Academy, invited to spend 2 weeks shadowing in the lab. Myra's hands trembled as she tried to pipe cream into a delicate bun twist. Lena leaned over, gently guiding her grip. "You're squeezing too much," she said with a smile. "Think of it like kindness. You don't need a lot, just the right pressure in the right place." Myra looked up uncertain. "I read about your brother," she whispered. "My grandma said what you did changed everything." Lena's smile faded into something softer. "What your grandma really means," Lena replied, "is that people are finally paying attention to the quiet ones." Myra blinked. "Like me?" Lena nodded. "Exactly like you. Across town legal department. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some of the older VPs whispered about lost control, increased legal risk, or rewarding amateurs. But those whispers were fading fast. Partly because Jackson was relentless. Partly because the board had witnessed firsthand how the market responded to transparency. Golden Harvest stock hadn't just recovered, it had surged. Why ain't it? Because the public trusted them again. Media outlets lauded the new policies. Customer loyalty skyrocketed. Independent creators began submitting ideas in droves, knowing they wouldn't just be heard, but credited and protected. A new generation of consumers cared about how companies treated people. And now Golden Harvest had become the face of ethical innovation. One afternoon in a small town in Ohio, a middle-aged woman walked into a grocery store. She picked up a loaf of Jason Hart Heritage sourdough, newly rebranded with a bronze label, and a photo of Jason kneading dough beside a quote: "Great bread rises twice, once in the oven, once in the people it feeds." The woman stood frozen, reading the label over and over. Tears filled her eyes. She turned to her teenage son and whispered, "He went to our high school. He used to give me cookies when I forgot lunch." The boy nodded. Now the whole country knows his name. Back in headquarters, the next decision, Jackson had called an all-hands meeting, not something he did often. This one was different. Every seat in the auditorium was filled. Some folks stood along the walls. Cameras were rolling. Even local press had been invited. He stepped onto the stage with Lena beside him. Behind them, a massive image projected on the screen. "The next Golden Harvest begins today." Jackson cleared his throat. For decades, we sold stories. The warm ones, the nostalgic ones. Childhood memories baked into every bite. But somewhere along the way, we stopped writing new stories. He turned toward Lena. "And then this woman showed us how to write again." There was a long applause. "She reminded us," he continued, "that it's not enough to build something great. You have to build it right. That means crediting your sources, paying your debts, and owning your mistakes." Jackson stepped aside. Lena took the mic. "I'm not a hero," she said plainly. "I just told the truth. And the truth is, this company stole my brother's work. But the truth doesn't stop there. Because now, this company gave his name back." Her voice wavered just slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about what legacy means. I used to think it was about being remembered. But now I think maybe legacy is making sure others don't have to fight the same battle." She held up the Equity Manifesto. "And this is how we make sure of it." The audience stood, applauded, not for a product, but for a promise, Final scene 1 year later, the bakery had changed. Not just in its look or even its leadership, but in its heartbeat. New signs line the walls of every golden harvest across the country. Every great bite starts with someone brave enough to believe in it. We don't just make bread, we honor the hands that shape it. Inside the new headquarters lobby, a sculpture was unveiled. Two hands carved in bronze, one weathered, one young kneading dough together. Beneath them, a plaque. The Hart Foundation for Creative Justice, founded in memory of Jason Hart. For every dreamer who dares to create in silence, we see you. We hear you. We credit you. Lena stood beside Jackson as the crowd gathered. He leaned in and whispered, "Think your brother would approve." She looked up at the sculpture, then around the room, then down at the young interns gathered near the front, bakers, designers, innovators who would never have to fight the war Jason did. She smiled. "I think he'd say we're finally baking it right." The new golden harvest wasn't about bread anymore. It was about dignity, about fairness, about rising not just in the oven, but in spirit. And like the best dough, it rose again and again because one woman refused to stay silent.